Few facts about the pilot. Authorities found that Captain Zahari had flown a similar path in his flight simulator at home in the previous month itself, very similar to the actual route that MH370 took. Even though the simulated flight was run into the Indian Ocean all the way till fuel exhaustion, just as speculated with the actual flight, this was labeled as not sinister in nature, as Zahari had flown thousands of other routes on that simulator. But one thing of note is that this is one of the few parts where Zahari had apparently manually progressed the flight in that section rather than let the simulator play it out itself. Some people have raised the question whether the simulation report is false or planted, especially because this was revealed nearly 2 years after the plane disappeared. Mm-hmm. One comment about the co-pilot was that this was his first flight without a supervisor. Every flight he's been on before, he's had a minder or a supervisor right, because he was training, right? And this was going to be his first full-fledged flight. But back to the pilot in command, Captain Zahari reports on his character are mixed. Many colleagues and family members describe him as happy, likable, very well respected as a pilot. No red flags in his history at all, which is in strong contrast to when you look at a case like Andreas Lubitz, for example. Sure. In hindsight, you can see all the red flags, but even with this pilot, in hindsight, no one could see any red flags. He used to make YouTube videos in his free time. But there have been other reports of some people who have said that he was lonely, separated from his wife, and often confided in friends that he was depressed and used to pace around in an empty room. This is all alleged. Allegedly, his wife and kids moved out of their house the day before, not confirmed. And he was known to have extramarital affairs, not confirmed, with the cabin crew.
I mean, you raised the point that there was no red flags about Zahari. That's true. Some people have. I think it's irresponsible. There was one famous American aviation journalist who said, "Oh, I had this anonymous source who says that he was having a marriage." This is the problem with anonymous sources: is that a lot of times what will happen is, I know this has happened. I've heard about this. You say to someone like, "You're Zahari's used to work with Zahari," and I say to you, "What do you think happened?" And you say, "I think Zahari took it." And my assumption is like, oh, a guy who used to work with him thinks he took it. Why do you think he took it? Because the news all says that he did. And so you shouldn't think that just because somebody says something, that means they have any informed basis for saying it. We have no confirmation of any kind of marital problems, debts, mental illness, anything that would make this guy do such a heinous and unthinkable act. There are cases of airplane pilots flying their plane into the ground to kill themselves and everyone aboard. They're incredibly rare, and they involve people who are on the edge of mental instability. There was one just actually quite recently where a guy tried to deploy the fire extinguishers aboard the engines of a plane. That's happened last year. And yeah, there's no signs of that, which is kind of I did an episode of my podcast about the dog that didn't bark in the night. And that is kind of like, how do you explain a guy you look at his YouTube videos, and I see a guy who is the sweetest, nicest, most emotionally stable, chill. This guy's had it made. He had this lifetime job. He was going to get a big fat pension. He had multiple houses, multiple cars. His family life sounded great.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where you see what you want to see. I saw the same thing, but there are people who see his videos about plugging a window and they're like, "Oh, why is he in the newspapers? The headlines are sending a message."
Exactly.
So I know.
there was one piece of evidence, and I was the one who first publicized it. It was about the fact that he had this flight simulator, and there was a month before he took the plane, supposedly he took the plane. He flew a flight that, as you said accurately, wound up in the Southern Ocean with zero fuel, and there's a lot of questions. Why don't we have more of this data? Can we have more information, please, Malaysian authorities, about the provenance of this data, and so on. However, I would say that, again, it's all in the eye of the beholder. Is it proof positive? Now, this is not a flight that went to Agari and did a 180 and went up the Malacca Straits. This is a flight that just went up the Malacca Straits without that sort of whole Agari part, which is really a baffling and hard to explain part. Yeah. And after he did that flight, it's worth noting, he did other flights. He did a kind of recreational flight in a DC-3. He did another flight, I think, in a 737. And to me, I'm like, if you're planning to kill yourself and you're using this flight simulator to kind of practice killing yourself, do you then like just for sheer amusement, like do something else? Yeah. Something that people who are depressed enough to be suicidal experience is a condition called anhedonia. You don't feel pleasure. So you're not, I mean, you're actually in a state of agony. You mentioned Andreas Lubitz, who flew his plane into the Alps and killed everyone on board. He was at the edge of his rope, at the end of his rope, because he thought that his career was over. He thought he wasn't going to be a pilot anymore. He was going to lose his identity. He wasn't like playing Mario Kart. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I do feel that, like, although I do think this is the only damning evidence against Zaharie, and I think it definitely deserves consideration, careful consideration. I would like to know more about it. I don't think it's the smoking gun that some people think it is.
We don't even have data whether he had conducted similar flights that ended in fuel exhaustion somewhere else in the world as well. Because when I play a game, I try to break the game as well. Like if I'm playing like a racing game, I try to crash into things. Like you try to do things that you can't do in real life, right? So,
well, the way he said it too is like he put it to 3,000 feet and he put the fuel to 0, and that's pretty much exactly what happened to Sullenberger. You know, the Miracle on the Hudson. So I wondered if, and that was over water too. It was right over here.
Yeah.
You probably see it from your window. But, and then there was another one that he set it for higher up. I think it was like at 30,000 feet, and he set the fuel to 0. And that looked a lot like another really famous case called the Gimli glider, where the pilots ran out of fuel and had to find a way to land, and they did. It was actually amazing. So maybe he was trying to do something else. Also, the data is incomplete. We don't really know. Hard to form. This is what we have to do. When you're trying to solve a mystery, get all of the data. This is a main part of my message. Get all of the data and understand it as deeply as you can. So both broad and deep understanding of all the available data. And you have to then you have to get all the hypotheses that match that data to a more or less degree. And I'll tell you, nothing fits all the data perfectly. But something happened to this plane. So there is an explanation that fits all of the data. Now, sometimes data can be wrong. You know, like the case of this flight simulator, we don't know every aspect of it. There might be some part of it that is more or less damning about him.